I'm an autism awareness angel, making sure my wings protect the different, the stranger than. I'm an autism awareness angel. It's good, cause I'm cool with the unique behavior. I'm an autism awareness angel. Will you accept me? Cause I accept you. I'm an autism awareness angel, cause the view from the spectrum is a better point of view. The question at hand.
Hi, I'm Tally, and welcome back to Autism 30. Today on our three-part podcast, we are speaking to Ms. Jodi Gilmore and Mr. Doug Protz from Overture Neurodevelopmental Support Services located in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. Miss Jodi Gilmore, who is very well known in the autism community, is a registered holistic nutritionist, reference and regulate therapist, neuro-optimal neurofeedback trainer who has been supporting children and families with autism, ADHD, anxiety, learning, behavioral, and other neurodevelopmental challenges. Mr. Doug Protz is an autism therapist, special services integration worker, and a certified handle service provider. This husband and wife team, who are parents to a brilliant son, have been learning from and serving individuals with autism since 1992 in Greater Vancouver, British Columbia. They co-founded their company, Overture Neurodevelopmental Support Services, which is located in Vancouver, British Columbia. Welcome, Jodi and Doug.
Hi. Neil.
Hi. Thanks for having us.
Oh, I'm so glad you could be here. Now, how did your interest in autism begin?
Back in 1992, I was working in a special needs integrated childcare and preschool program. Mm-hmm. And I suppose my interest in autism, I was interested in autism to the extent that I was very interested in child development and learning. At that time, the child I was working with was a diagnosis of 1 in 1,500, so I didn't know a lot about autism at that time, and I wasn't working, it was not as prevalent. So I was interested in autism to this extent that I was interested in a lot of things that had to do with children and learning and development. And
which is wonderful.
Yeah. And as far as my true interest in autism, I kind of had no choice but to become interested in autism.
And why is that?
Our own son was diagnosed in the late 90s.
Which was a long time ago, mm-hmm. Which must have been, what was the information out there like at that time?
Very little. The psychiatrist at Children's Hospital knew of our backgrounds and said, I'm sure you're both aware that your son has autism, and I'll write up the report, and sent us out the door. And you could have knocked me over with a feather. Even having worked in the industry, if you were, mm-hmm. for a number of years, those labels are for other people's children.
And I understand that, because I've said on, I believe, my first podcast, I've taught high school students with autism and knew they were fine, but the second my son received the diagnosis, I was equally as blown away.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So what was your journey like at that time then?
Around his diagnosis?
Yeah, around his diagnosis, because, there wasn't a lot of information out there at that point. So what did the two of you really have to do? You must have faced enormous challenges.
Yeah. Well, I remember as he was developing, and he was developing for all intents and purposes quite typically. He reached all of his milestones. He developed language very early. He was very social and interactive, and I was kind of, as a mother, watching around the age of 2. I was waiting for him to get past that age of 2 where you hear about regressions and things like that.
Yes.
And when he hit his second birthday and we seemed to be okay, I thought, whew, okay,
yes.
we're past that. So it was around 2 years and 4 months that I started to notice. I put him down for a nap one day, and when he woke up, I felt like he was a different child.
And there are stories like that are out there, yes.
Yeah, and so certainly, there were other earlier indicators in a very mild kind of way.
Do you remember what those were?
As an example, I took care of a friend's child who was 3 days younger than our son, and she must have been about maybe 9 or 10 months old, and she was pointing at things. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. He doesn't point.
Which is an indicator, yes.
So there's a joint attention thing there. However, he was still, and he was very, very busy and easily overwhelmed and, things like that. But he wasn't having a really hard time interacting with other toddlers. 2 years and 4 months, and then it was just kind of a slow and insidious unraveling of my child.
That's actually beautifully put, because I know people in the community, you constantly hear of that age 2 or 18 months where the child does, or some children do change.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting that you mentioned that. And what was your discovery at that point?
Well, having both of us had been working with children with special needs for quite some time, and so our sense of what was typical was a little bit skewed. And while he was throwing us a lot of curveballs, he wasn't throwing us a lot of curveballs we hadn't seen before. So,
yes.
We were able to kind of roll with it. It was when he went to preschool, which is very, very common. It started to become more evident because he was around other children more. He had also, I guess the decline or the unraveling was very, very slow, and we had good days and bad days and good days and bad days. And so it can be hard to see the forest for the trees when you're just in it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so, his first preschool, they said, well, we think maybe you should have him looked at. Maybe he has ADHD or something like that. And so we yanked him.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't going to have somebody just labeling my child. The next preschool teacher, it was a different program, and she was just artful in the way she interacted with him. She was lovely with him and brought out all of his strengths. And she invited herself over for tea one day and said, these are the things, these are what I view as his strengths.
Yes.
And then here are these little things that kind of worry me. And so what do you think about having an assessment done just to rule things out so we know we don't have anything to worry about?
Which is a very smart thing to do.
Yeah. And so because I trusted her and I knew she really respected my child and didn't make a lot of assumptions, I was willing to do that. And I, in the back of my mind, I did have fears about what might be going on.
Of course.
And, he was increasingly in his own world and on the periphery of life.
Yes.
On some days. On other days, he was right there with me. And then you forget about the day before where your child's,
yes.
standing in the corner flapping or looking at their fingers for long periods of time. So that was kind of how it unfolded. And in those days, well, we didn't have a computer, so there wasn't internet access in the way that there is now.
Yes, we're very fortunate now.
Yeah, and all the news was bad news, let me tell you. There were no happy stories. There was, it was simply, this is a serious, lifelong, debilitating condition. And I kind of felt like I was watching a car accident in slow motion, just waiting. Well, when will he stop talking? Will he stop talking? When will that happen? When, how bad is this going to get?
Absolutely. And what you're also, your fears are also justified, because it's not till recent days that people on the autism spectrum were institutionalized.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, yeah. And then in terms of what do we do about this, the only thing sort of readily available to us was more of a behavioral approach. And I didn't, while we certainly were experiencing behaviors, I didn't
Yes.
view it as a behavior problem. It was a developmental problem. And that's what we needed to sort out. There was a developmental issue going on with our son. Something had impacted, or probably a variety of things, in my view, had impacted his development. And I also, at that period of time, so my sense of what autism means has changed a lot over the years. And at that time, I was viewing him as just being, I guess you could think of it as kind of like a neuro tribe kind of thing. Well, you know, we're just a different kind of family. We're different people.
Yes.
And we are experiencing the world differently. We are perceiving and processing information differently. And, you know, that was kind of the way I viewed it at that time. So, you know, 15 years ago, if you had said to me that autism was a medical issue, number one, I would have thought you were crazy. Okay. Number two, I would have been offended.
Yes.
There's nothing wrong with my child. And, you know, since then that has changed. To me, the true label, if you will, is capital S, sensitive.
And I love that term, sensitive.
Yeah.
And how did you come up with that term?
It just seemed like the best fit. You know, in my experience, the children that I've worked with, people that I've known, you know, raising my own son, being me in my own body and life, we are sensitive across the board. We are biochemically sensitive, physiologically sensitive, emotionally sensitive, energetically sensitive, spiritually sensitive people. And so to me, autism is a word to describe a collection of symptoms exhibited by the capital S sensitive person when they are under stress. And by stress, I mean internal stresses, so perhaps toxicity in the body, biochemical imbalances in the body, inflammation in the body, overgrowths in the body, those kinds of things, and external stresses. So being out in the world and, you know, exposures to toxicity in our food, air, water supply, building materials,
and you want to know
chemical exposures, electromagnetic fields, all of these things that we are, this soup of toxicity that we are swimming in, that our ancestors were not swimming in to the same degree.
Absolutely, and I'm really happy you also mentioned that, because I think often the perception is that people with autism don't feel because they don't display their feelings in a typical fashion.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm really happy that you actually mentioned that. Now, overall, how did your past experiences in dealing with your son lead you to the direction of where you are now?
Mm-hmm.
Like,
yeah. Well, back in 1981, I read the book Sunrise by Neil Kaufman.
Which is a great book.
Yeah, it was a really good book, and it really stuck with me. And the whole idea of how they chose to engage their son in a very meaningful and respectful way through joining him in his play and trying to experience the world through his body,
yes,
and mind, and then using that as a springboard for helping him to develop, stuck with me. You know, I was in my early teens then, and I went on over the years to work with a variety of children in a variety of capacities. And whether somebody has autism or not, I still think it's the best way to build a relationship with a child. It's the best place to start. And so, you know, I was doing that in my work, and then I had my child, and I interacted with him in that way very much. So when I was working in the childcare, I was also trained in a lot of art and play therapy strategies. So it taught me to be very patient and observant and quiet.
Which is really an important quality for anybody working with children.
Yeah. And so it taught me how to really watch for cues, watch for my ins, watch for my green lights and my opportunities to insert myself in a child's activity in a way that was pleasant and non-threatening.
And you spoke about your ins. Can you go into what an in is?
It's like an opening. It's it's very much like a dance where you're dancing with a group of people and you've got to watch its timing and it's feeling the other people.
So as a parent or a therapist working with a child with autism, it's really important to not push your agenda on, to wait and initiate, to see the initiation from the child for your in?
Essentially, especially in the beginning. I want a child to enjoy being with me and to learn that being with other people can be comfortable and safe. And so, that's where I start. And I definitely want to challenge a child to grow.
Absolutely.
And so, what I like to do is try and insert myself into their play in a way that feels very safe and comfortable with them, and then gradually bend it.
Yes.
In a way that I think might help them to develop their language, develop their play skills, develop their self-regulation, things like that.
That's really good. So you build a great relationship with the child as you're working.
Yes.
And what led you both to create your company, Overture Neurodevelopmental Support Services? What led you to start that?
The name Overture itself came from just an idea very, very similar to what Jodi was just talking about. Overture being an offering, and that you're not necessarily insisting that the person respond to your overture. And one of the things that I learned early on is it's actually an amazing way to build rapport with anyone. When you make an offer to someone and they refuse you, obviously, an autistic child isn't going to do that with a great deal of finesse. I know they're just going to turn around and whatever. But just the fact that you've made that offer, they've turned you down, and the ball is still in your court to really be attentive and respectful and have a good sense of humor about it and offer them again and again. And you can make several offers and they can turn you down, and they're not necessarily saying no. They might just be saying, without saying it, they've got another bit of information that they're processing in their head right now. And when they're done, things look differently. As Jodi was talking about the ins. One of the expressions you hear is, if you can learn to get it right here, speak with your body and listen with your eyes, and that that can be something that makes it again easier for someone who is having a hard time articulating to you that you're not in the same. They're not ready to engage with you in the way that you're offering right now. But you can definitely build rapport by respecting that, but still remaining attentive to them. So so that's kind of one of the ideas behind the name itself.
Yes.
But in terms of why we wanted to start a company, I guess that was just even Jodi mentioned before our son was diagnosed. We had an experience. I guess one of the shifting experiences that I had was I was working with an autistic boy, and I enjoyed it. It was physical. It was a lot of the times it was just take him outside. The room was becoming too much for him. So it was very physical. It was very enjoyable walking around the woods at UBC, and I still do that with a lot of the kids that I work with. And it's the fresh air and all of that stuff is amazing. But when a shift happens, one of the parents, and all the things that we do through nutrition, the R&R, the handle, all the things that we've kind of made as the pillars of our business, all have started out as recommendations by parents across the board. And it's just they're, always kind of having passion and ideas and certainly the ones that we tried that worked the best. But anyways, I was invited by a mom to come and listen to a speaker, and she was actually just doing a presentation where she was giving young people an opportunity to share their story who are on the spectrum. And
Yes.
they were maybe 16 to 24, roughly. I'm not sure exactly. And she was very, very dynamic, confident speaker. She was clear, very easy to listen to. It was peculiar. There was only 30 people allowed at a time. It was, I remember, it was at GF Strom, and I thought, that's odd that she put a window or put a limitation on how many people could come. But anyway, so we're listening to these young kids speak, and she would introduce a little bit of them, and then they would speak for maybe 10 minutes, and then she would kind of wrap it. She would kind of summarize what they'd said a little bit, or just kind of expand a little bit on it. But for the most part, it was the young guys doing the talking. Anyways, at the end of it, she said, if you have a question, just wait till the end, and everyone will get a chance to ask a question.
Fair.
And sure enough, when the fourth speaker had finished, and she'd finished wrapping up his thoughts, crystallizing his thoughts, she went one by one to every person in the audience. Do you have something to say? Do you have something you'd like to ask? And some people did, and some people didn't. And I can't even remember having that, deriving a question to ask. But, when you're kind of waiting your turn, and I was person number 26, and I better say something.
Yes.
And I just remember asking this question. And I was just, I was working with a boy, and I probably wanted to say something about, what's the best way to work with them. And I probably, had some theories at the time about non-coercive education versus structure, and on I went on my question. And the blood just drained from her face. And this dynamic person was just stood there like she was numb.
Interesting.
And she was just like, and then finally one of the older boys, a young man, 24-year-old who had also spoken at this thing, he said, "That's the risk we take talking to you people."
Interesting.
And he just started to chew me out, and he said, that question you asked, he goes, if I could reiterate how I heard what you said blah, 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 two significant words, blah, 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 two significant words. He goes, could I just sum up your question in boom, boom, boom? What do you think's the best way to work with autistic children? He goes, but because she was trying to listen to you and trying to process your information, and it's different the way we do it, this is what you've done to her. And she's still standing in silence at this point. Like,
I see.
And she goes, it's going to take her a long time to come out of this. And he goes, if you had any idea how much processing is required when you use all these unnecessary words. And it was kind of, the public shaming was so interesting because, sorry?
But it must have been a real education.
It was just kind of like, well, here I'm a nice guy. I think, I've got the guy's best interest in my head, in my heart. And then to have someone demonstrate in live time just how damaging excessive chatter can be. So,
and I think that whole point is really important too, because I know myself as a parent. I know my husband can say I use far too many words to describe something simply, and I do that with my own son. So I think that's a really good reminder to parents over there to keep things short and clear, because some people on the spectrum do take extra processing time.
Oh, absolutely. And because they process differently than, sometimes it's a weakness, sometimes it's a difference. And, that's part of the game is to tease all of that stuff apart. So going into that, going forward with the work, and what I found working at the same center Jodi was at actually a couple of years later, it wasn't just everything that I was learning, because I ended up doing some training with these people. And everything that I was learning wasn't only just working with the autistic boy that I was working with, but it was also working incredibly well with all the other kids in the center. And it was just everybody, and that really kind of put the whole thing. You hear autism is a spectrum, but it's part of the human spectrum, and we're all on that spectrum. And stress,
lovely and true.
And stress is such a big part. If you want to see someone behave oddly, put them in a stressful situation that they can't get out of, and they don't know how to get out of it. And
very true.
Just wait, and you'll start to see behaviors from anyone. So, kind of that same strategy of giving people more time and space can be huge, especially with boys perceiving that it's easier for them if they can move things around in three-dimensional space instead of relying so much on discussion. And girls tend to be a fair bit stronger at that quite early. So it was good to have kind of learn these things and then directly go and have a chance to play with it in a playground of kids kind of thing. So
it's absolutely. So correct me if I'm wrong. What you're saying is, Jodi, what you've learned in raising your son with all the tried and tested theories that you were faced with and everything that you had learned. Also, Doug, through your work and workshops and everything, you pretty much, because of the words from parents that were guiding you, you felt there was a real need in the community to deliver the program that you were giving students and your client space with autism. So what you're saying is, with all your knowledge, which is really vast because you have been in it for such a long time, and your wealth of experience is grand, you felt that there was a real need for your company to be created. Am I wrong in that?
No, what I wanted as a parent was choice and information. And so what we're trying to do is provide people with choice and information.
And we here in British Columbia are lucky because of the fact that currently in British Columbia, we do have the option to do a variety of different therapies in the province and have it being validated with our funding.
Yes. So, all children are different, all families are different, and people need to sort out what is the best approach for their child at this point in time. And that could change in 6 months or a year or in 5 years, but people need choice. And
I think that's a wonderful place to end off on our first part of this 3-part interview. So thank you for joining us today and listening to how and why Jodi and Doug became involved in autism and why they created their company, Overture Neurodevelopmental Support Services. And don't forget to tune in to the second part of this podcast on December 15th, 2016 to learn more about them and R&R, also called Reference and Regulate, and Holistic Nutrition. I also want to remind our audience that with this festive season among us, let's not forget to be extra cognizant to the extra added challenges that some of our community members face at this time, with the added lights, music, sounds, and smells in the air, and changes to a routine schedule that can place an added burden to an already tested system, and how this can affect their families as well. I want to give a huge thank you to those individuals who make a special effort to understand, support, and help those at this time, so we can all call this the season of joy. Happy holiday to all our Autism 30 audience members, and once again, this is Tally telling you to live in love.
Hey yo, I'm an autism awareness angel, making sure my wings protect the different, the stranger than